in those past few months to get this plan done. Ambassador David Friedman. Thank you, David. Thank you for your essential contribution to this effort and for the terrific job you do every day to strengthen the great alliance between Israel and America. And Jared Kushner, without your wisdom, your persistence, your resolve, this day would have never come. I know how much the Jewish future means to you and to your family. Well, Jared, today you have helped secure that future. The Jewish state owes you, and it owes President Trump, an eternal debt of gratitude.
Amen.
Mr. President, on that historic day of May 14th, 1948, both David Ben-Gurion and President Truman had a fateful decision to make. Many argued that Ben-Gurion should not declare Israel's independence. Many argued that President Truman should not recognize the Jewish state. But both leaders understood the magnitude of the hour.
Right.
They seized the moment and they changed history. Like you, Mr. President, I understand the magnitude of this moment. With you, Mr. President, I'm prepared to seize the moment and change history. I know that there'll be opposition. There's always opposition. I know there'll be many obstacles along the way, much criticism. But we have an old Jewish saying, if not now, when? And if not us, who? Im lo achshav, matai, im lo anachnu, az mi. Mr. President, your deal of the century is the opportunity of the century. And rest assured, Israel will not miss this opportunity. Mr. President, Donald, Israel is blessed to have your friendship and your powerful leadership. And Israel is blessed to have the friendship of the greatest power on earth, the United States of America. May God bless America. May God bless Israel. And may God bless us all with security, prosperity, and peace. Thank you.
Yes. Yes.
Well, you heard it here first. The public release of Donald Trump's self-proclaimed deal of the century, his proposal to end the decades of conflict between Israel and the Palestinians, including what he described as a realistic two-state solution, which includes Jerusalem as Israel's undivided capital. There will be, he said, a Palestinian state with some presence in Jerusalem. And Jordan will control the Al-Aqsa Mosque, Temple Mount in Jerusalem. Quite how all of that will work together will, I guess, be the devil in the detail, as it were. We also heard from the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who Donald Trump thanked for having the courage, he said, to take, quote, this bold step forward of the Palestinian people. Donald Trump said they deserve a better life. They've been trapped, he said, in a cycle of poverty and terrorism. No Palestinians will be uprooted from their homes. Look, that was a long session, nigh on 50 odd minutes. I've got your two experts with us before the top of the hour. Let's break this down. Oren's in Jerusalem, Jeremy Diamond is in DC, and Sam Kiley is out in Ramallah. Jeremy, let me get to you first. What do you make of what you just heard?
Two main points. First of all, I know that we've been talking before the president spoke about the extent to which this was going to be skewed in Israel's favor, and it was very clear that this was an extremely pro-Israel plan, probably the most pro-Israel plan of past peace plans that have been presented by other presidents. At the same time, it did go perhaps a little bit further in the Palestinian direction than many pessimists were perhaps expecting, in the sense that it does call for the creation of an independent state of Palestine. But how you actually get there is really difficult to see here, particularly because it seems that ultimately, regardless of whether or not the Palestinians agree to the terms of this agreement, President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu seem to make clear that they are moving forward with this. Netanyahu said that President Trump would be recognizing Israeli sovereignty over all settlements, big and small, in the West Bank. That would essentially, it seems, based on the comments by Netanyahu and by Trump, amount to Israeli annexation, perhaps, of those territories and U.S. recognition of those territories. That would be a tremendous, a huge step in the direction, the right-wing direction in Israeli politics, and it would certainly have tremendous implications for the future of the peace process, regardless of whether or not this is the deal that becomes the framework for future negotiations between the United States and Palestinians. We do have a lot of questions, though, that still remain after the remarks by those two leaders, particularly on the question of Jerusalem. We heard President Trump say, on the one hand, that Jerusalem will remain Israel's undivided capital, and then moments later he said that there will be a Palestinian capital in East Jerusalem. Those two things seem to be at odds with one another. I also do think that it's notable that the president did not address the question of Palestinian refugees, the question of the right of return for those Palestinian refugees. And again, this is a lot still needs to be unpacked here, but certainly this is something that takes things in a very pro-Israel direction. The Palestinians are all but certain to reject this, as they already have before they saw the plan. Again, a lot of questions still remain here, but certainly this is clearly the direction that this administration is moving in.
And we are getting immediate reaction from Jeremy, from Oren, and from Sam as that what will I call it, presentation ended there at the White House. Moments ago, Donald Trump, Oren, explained why he thinks his deal will succeed where earlier attempts to bring peace have failed. Have a listen.
In the past, even the most well-intentioned plans were light on factual details and heavy on conceptual frameworks. By contrast, our plan is 80 pages and is the most detailed proposal ever put forward by far. As I have seen throughout my long career as a deal maker, complex problems require nuanced, fact-based remedies. That is why...
Well, that is the US president. Can this work as a blueprint for peace, Oren?
Well, as of right now, that answer appears to be no, for the reasons Jeremy just mentioned, is that the Palestinians will see nothing in here to like. Sure, it calls for the creation of a Palestinian state, but certainly not on any borders that have ever been called for before, not on any borders that resemble the Green Line, the 1967 armistice line there, and not on anything that resembles international law or UN Security Council resolutions. But that appears to be very much the direction the Trump administration wanted to go, departing with past efforts and saying we're going in a new direction. And it is clearly, as Jeremy said, not only a pro-Israel direction, but a pro-settlements in the West Bank direction, recognizing, as Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said, Israeli sovereignty not only in the Jordan Valley, but also over all settlements in the West Bank. Worth noting that if Trump decides to sign that or sign a decree saying that, that supersedes even Israeli law. Israel has never recognized its own sovereignty in the West Bank, either in the Jordan Valley or in the settlements along the Green Line, the settlement blocks, and beyond that. So that'll be interesting to see. And certainly, if this is a green light, and it certainly looks like it right now, a green light for Netanyahu to come back here and begin annexation immediately upon his return. That is one of the things we'll certainly be looking for. I too, like Jeremy, and I think like all of us, are very curious to see this map, but it doesn't change the fact that the Palestinians are certain to reject this plan. It is noteworthy that the ambassadors of Oman, Bahrain, and the UAE were in there, but are they any more accepting of this plan? We'll have to wait and see. Also worth pointing out that Netanyahu appeared to give many more details of what's inside this plan than Trump himself, laying out a number of points, for example, that Palestinian refugees must be settled outside the borders of Israel. He talked about, of course, about sovereignty in the West Bank, in the Jordan Valley, and in the settlements, saying that is obviously important to Israel and is based on truth, as Netanyahu pointed out. Worth noting two other things. First, Netanyahu gave a different reason that previous peace efforts haven't worked before. He didn't say it was about the lack of details. He said it was that previous peace efforts didn't strike the right balance. For Netanyahu, that balance is pretty much 100% pro-Israel. And just tying in some of the news of the day, the last point I'll make here before you go to Sam and others who I'm sure are waiting to weigh in, Trump talked about a need to end Palestinian corruption while standing next to an Israeli prime minister who's not only indicted on corruption, but who was indicted formally about 6 hours ago.
You make an interesting point. You make some very, very valid and important points. Sam, let's get you in. Speaking moments ago at the White House, Donald Trump promised the Palestinians a raft of economic benefits if they were to go along with his plan. Let's just have a quick listen to what he said.
Over the next 10 years, if executed well, 1 million great new Palestinian jobs will be created. Their poverty rate will be cut in half, and their poverty rate is unacceptable now and only getting worse. Their GDP will double and triple, and much needed hope, joy, opportunity, and prosperity will finally arrive for the Palestinian people. Our vision will end the cycle of Palestinian dependency upon charity and foreign aid. They will be doing phenomenally all by themselves. They are a very, very capable people.
Sam, Donald Trump supporters will say, quite frankly, what's not to like?
Well, ask the Jordanians would be the initial response. They clearly would not be comfortable at all with a unilateral annexation of the Jordan Valley that would put Israel, not a Palestinian state, which is what they've always argued for, as their immediate neighbor across the River Jordan. On top of that, the assumption is that the Arab world is going to stump up this 50 billion figure over 10 years to subsidize the Palestinian state if it signs up to this plan. There's no evidence whatsoever other than the presence of the Omani, Bahraini and Emirati ambassadors at that meeting, but Oman certainly doesn't really have the money to get involved in that kind of project, and it's very, very unclear, I think, that given the amount of controversy this plan will generate internationally at the very least, that there will be an automatic check being offered by American allies across the Arab world. The real issue here, as Oren and Jeremy have pointed out, that this would appear to be, certainly from the view of Benjamin Netanyahu, an endorsement of what could be an instantaneous annexation of the whole of the Jordan Valley and the annexation of Jewish settlements across the West Bank. That would make it impossible to have a contiguous Palestinian state. It would look like an ink blot, and inevitably, and this is very much the sort of language you might expect to hear from some of the Europeans, potentially led by the French, inevitably they're going to start using the word apartheid for this plan, because it would look a bit like a Bantustan. These are words that have been threatened to be used in the past from the Europeans. They used to be the sort of thing that would cause the Israelis extreme discomfort. And in this context, it would make it very difficult indeed for the European Union to continue its funding on the West Bank of this whole process. And already we're hearing, not least from Israeli-Palestinian group, B'Tselem, that they are deriding this plan emphatically. We're waiting to hear officially from the Palestine Liberation Organization, whose leadership is meeting as we speak to try to digest the results of this very, very extraordinary double act from Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli Prime Minister, just over a month away from attempted re-election next to Donald Trump himself involved in the middle of an impeachment process. So a very, very extraordinary moment. But the really key issue here is going to be, what does this map look like? And I think that map, which as far as we understand has not yet been published, will be extremely revealing, Becky.
Sam Kiley is in Ramallah on the West Bank. To all of you, thank you. I want to get immediate reaction now from the Palestinian side. Hussam Zomlot was head of the Palestinian mission in Washington before the Trump administration closed his office down. He is now the Palestinian ambassador to the United Kingdom, and he joins me from London. If they do this, it will work. The words of Donald Trump and his message to the Palestinians today. Your response to what you have just heard, sir?
What I just heard and saw was a second-rate political comedy, really. It's a political circus, and it's a scam in the lowest possible situation. I mean, President Trump himself said that he likes to do big things, and he did 3 big things today. The first, he just killed the prospects of a negotiated two-state solution, because if an Israeli prime minister had already pocketed Jerusalem, all the settlements, the Jordan Valley, which is more than a third of the occupied West Bank, pocketed the issue of refugees, you tell me, Becky, if any future Israeli prime minister will sit and negotiate a two-state solution in accordance with international resolutions. The second big thing President Trump has just killed today is international order itself, is the post-Second World War order that was established primarily actually to resolve conflicts peacefully and to introduce rules that govern the relationship between nations and states. And the premise, the heart of that order is the inadmissibility of acquiring territory, let alone annexing territory, by force. That premise has been dismantled today, and I believe today will begin the rule of the jungle, chaos all over, because you will have 100 Netanyahus all over the world who are facing criminal charges, are facing elections, and who would want to do the same, just grab territories, annex territories for the sake of being re-elected. And the third big thing President Trump today did, he actually helped Israel being pushed off the cliff towards apartheid, full-fledged apartheid, because what Israel will have to erect now is simply Pantostans, as your correspondent Sam just said. And I think this will be remembered by the future Israeli generations, that Mr. Trump was the one who actually did not allow Israel to go in the path of a genuine, real peace. And we all know what are the parameters for peace, Becky.
And I hear what you're saying, and we are listening to the voice and the thoughts of Hussam Zomlot, who is now the Palestinian ambassador to the UK. Responding, within minutes of President Trump announcing the details of what, or giving us a sort of, the ballpark of what he calls this deal of the century, a deal, the opportunity of a lifetime, he said. Let's have a listen to specifically what he said.
Today's agreement is a historic opportunity for the Palestinians to finally achieve an independent state of their very own. After 70 years of little progress, this could be the last opportunity they will ever have.
You have argued that you do not buy what the US president has just said. This is by no means, you say, in favor of the Palestinians. So what happens next, sir?
I mean, President Trump can really benefit from some humility. Even in his speech, he couldn't pronounce the name of the third holiest mosque, the Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem, and he wants to draw the faith of 13 million Palestinians without having one of the 13 million in his audience, and having all the extreme right-wing Israeli representatives and those from the American side is really a show. It's President Trump came from the show business, and it tells you a lot about his mindset in terms of the real estate business, that somebody gets the property and somebody gets the cash. In this case, Israel gets the entire property. That's why Netanyahu was there, and also having the guts to represent the Palestinians and speak on behalf of the Palestinians when he is literally killing them by the day, besieging them and colonizing their land, our land. And therefore, this whole thing is the most disingenuous scam we have ever seen in modern history. We Palestinians know exactly the way forward, and together with us, the rest of the world. I mean, the way forward is very well known. Israel must end its occupation that began in 1967 lines. It's simple, it's clear, it's straightforward. This is an illegal occupation. East Jerusalem is under illegal military occupation. Once Israel ends its occupation, a Palestinian sovereign state will be established in these territories, and a fair resolution to the issue of Palestinian refugees in accordance with international law.
Now, Israel.
This is the last thing, Becky, in this part. Now, Israel can have peace with its own settlers, because I saw in your video and transmission the leaders of the settler movement in Israel. Israel can have peace with the US president. Israel can have peace even with Europe or the Arab world. But in the end, Israel needs to have peace with us, the Palestinians. And what Netanyahu, with the help of Trump today, managed to say is simply this. Palestinian.
Let me just start, sir, and I am absolutely listening to what you're saying, but with respect, sir, I'm going to run out of time, and I do want our viewers just to hear a little more of what was said by President Trump in what was his pitch to you, the Palestinians. Have a listen.
This map will more than double the Palestinian territory and provide a Palestinian capital in eastern Jerusalem, where America will proudly open an embassy. No Palestinians or Israelis will be uprooted from their homes. Our vision will deliver massive commercial investment of $50 billion into the new Palestinian state. You have many, many countries that want to partake in this.
The words of Donald Trump, his son-in-law, the architect of this blueprint, let's call it, for what the Trump administration believes is a plan for peace between Israel and the Palestinians. If not now, when? To quote a phrase then from Benjamin Netanyahu earlier. Sir?
When there will be a genuine, real attempt at providing peace that will answer the very righteous, legitimate demands of the millions of people. I mean, people demand their dignity, their sovereignty, their freedom, and they demand justice. Justice is a very crucial word. Peace can never achieved via these diktats and bullying. I mean, nations cannot be bullied like this by a president, a US president, who knows little about the Palestinian people. He thinks we live on charity. In fact, we are one of the richest in the region. We have the human resources, we have the natural resources, but our resources are being stolen by the man who stands next to him, or stood next to him, Benjamin Netanyahu and his government. And by the way, we fund ourselves. International funding is a small little fraction of our budget. We are not in need of his money. And if he thinks, President Trump, that actually he can bribe us and he can buy our rights, we are not up for sale. We told them this directly. We tell them this. Now, the only way for peace to be achieved is the fulfillment of the Palestinian rights. And these rights have been enshrined in international law. The two-state solution, Becky, was never a Palestinian demand. It was an international requirement. And we have given that concession to the international community. And today, I think it's up to the international community to stand up for its own order, its own resolution. And I believe we Palestinians will remain where we are. We will raise our kids to the highest standards. We are resilient. We will persevere. We have seen many empires come and go. This is not the first and will not be the last. It's not the first colonial exercise against us. And we will remain. The question is about Israel and its future. And I tell you, today Israel has gone into the full-fledged apartheid, and it is about the international system. This is the question. And I believe today the international system has received a direct blow, and the world is expected to answer and to stand up for their own rules and their own principles.
With that, sir, we are going to leave it there because I've got to get other voices on this evening, but we do very much appreciate your time. All right, well, let's get you back to this moment from 1993. President Bill Clinton in the middle as Israel's Yitzhak Rabin and the Palestinian leader Yasser Arafat shake hands, confirming the Oslo Accords. Well, Yossi Beilin is a former Israeli justice minister and architect of the Oslo Peace Accords between Israel and the Palestinians in the 1990s, and he now joins me from New York. And sir, thank you for your time. You've been there, sir. You know how intractable these issues of sovereignty and of land and of heritage have been for decades. What do you make of what many are suggesting is a blueprint for peace presented by the Donald Trump administration, which his detractors say is skewed very favorably, more than favorably, in view of the Israelis?
Not for Israel. It is not a pro-Israeli plan. In many ways, in my view, it is an anti-Israeli plan. I mean, the real interest of the state of Israel, of the Jewish people, is to have a democratic and Jewish state in Israel. Now, what is happening here is actually telling us you can take whatever you want. I mean, if we really take whatever we want, there will be a one-state solution in which Jews will be a minority. This is the last thing that Zionism was about. And so to say that this is a plan which is a pro-Israeli, it is pro-Israeli right, which is in many ways post-Zionist. And to think that you can suggest something like this without talking to the Palestinians, without listening to what they think, is really unbelievable. Maybe they made mistakes by not cooperating with the Americans enough and trying to tell them exactly what they wanted or not. I'm not entering into it. But the fact that you stand there and celebrating something which is totally one-sided, which is the right in America and the right in Israel against the whole world. Take Jerusalem, take all the East Jerusalem, including the refugee camps apparently or whatever, take all the settlements and have the sovereignty there. And the last thing is when Bibi is coming and saying, now I'm going to Israel for 4 years, I will not touch the land that you, Mr. President, allocated to the Palestinians in the future, but of course, immediately I will annex the Jordan Valley. What for? For the security of 50 years ago? Today, this is our security? Who is the enemy on the other side? Jordan. We have now a safe eastern border. Now to repeat the Alon plan, if you remember, Becky, of 67 is a joke. Why do we need it at all? Just to poke in the eye of the Palestinians.
Let me just stop you there for 1 second. Yeah. Okay, and I'm sorry that I spoke over there. You said this is a poke in the eye to the Palestinians of this world. So if not this plan, what? How do you solve this issue? And where does this plan leave the process?
I don't think that we can solve it with Netanyahu. Really, I don't want to be too partisan, but you see the difference between Benny Gantz, who is not my choice, and Netanyahu, who is for sure not my choice. Benny Gantz said, well, I accept the plan, and I will negotiate with the Palestinians on this basis. Netanyahu said, I accept this plan, and I'm going to annex the Jordan River. This is the whole difference. So if you ask me what is the solution, we found solutions for all the issues on the agenda. The most difficult issues, including refugees and Jerusalem and whatever, it is based on the Clinton parameters, and it is the Geneva Initiative of 2003. And I believe today that we should add to it another point, which is a confederation between Israel and Palestine, which will enable the real coordination of security and keeping the settlements, the legal settlements, according to Israel, in place, but under the Palestinian state and the Palestinian rule, not as an outpost of Israel in Judea and Samaria, which really makes it impossible.
All right. So, well, listen, it's been a pleasure having you on. Thank you. An important response to what has been an important day at the White House. How this plays itself out, we'll stick with CNN for that. The deal of the century and an opportunity of a lifetime. That is how President Trump and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu framed the unveiling of the White House's pro-Israel plan to bring peace to the Middle East. The Palestinian ambassador to the UK telling me moments ago it is a political circus. We will continue to bring you reaction from both sides over the coming days, as you would expect from this show. But for now, that is it for what has been a much extended edition of Connect the World this evening. Thank you for watching. Now, we've got to get you over to the other big story in Washington going on in parallel to what we have been discussing, CNN's special coverage of the impeachment trial of President Trump.
Anti-democratic. So those were the two observations I wanted to add to supplement specific points on Professor Dershowitz's comments from last night. Now I want to shift gears and respond to a couple of points that the House managers have brought up that are really completely extraneous to this proceeding. They involve matters that are not charged in the articles of impeachment. They do not relate directly to the president or his actions. But they are accusations that were brought up somewhat recklessly in any event, and we cannot close without some response to them. And the first has to do with the idea that somehow the White House and White House lawyers were involved in some sort of cover-up related to the transcript of the July 25th call because it was stored on a highly classified system. So let me start with that. The House managers made this accusation there was something nefarious going on. But let's see what the witnesses actually had to say. Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Vindman, and remember, Lieutenant Colonel Vindman is the person who was listening in on the call and who raised a concern, the only person who went and raised a concern with NSC lawyers that he thought there was something improper, something wrong with the call, even though he later conceded under cross-examination it was really a policy concern, but he thought there was something wrong. And he had to say that he did not think, he said, so I do not think there was malicious intent or anything of that nature to cover anything up. He's the one who went and talked to the lawyers. He's the one whose complaint spurred the idea that, wait, there might be something that's really sensitive here. We should make sure that this is not going to leak. He thought there was nothing covering it up. His boss, Senior Director Tim Morrison, had similar testimony.
So to the best of your knowledge, there's no malicious intent in moving the transcript to the compartment and server?
Correct.
And the idea that there was some sort of cover-up is further destroyed by the simple fact that everyone who, as part of their jobs, needed access to that transcript still had access to it, including Lieutenant Colonel Vindman. Right? So the person who raises a complaint still has access to the transcript the entire time. And this is the way Mr. Morrison's testimony explained that.
And even on the code word server, you had access to it?
Yes.
So at no point in time during the course of your official duties were you denied access to this information?
Correct.
Correct. And to your knowledge, anybody on the NSC staff that needed access to the transcript for their official duties always was able to access it, correct? People that had a need to know and a need to access it.
Once it was moved to the compartmented system? Yes.
Okay.
Now, as Mr. Morrison testified, he recommended restricting access to the transcript, not because he had any concern that there was anything improper or illegal, but he was concerned about a potential leak. And as he put it, how that, quote, would play out in Washington's polarized environment, end quote, and would, quote, affect the bipartisan support our Ukrainian partners currently experience in Congress. And he was right to be concerned potentially about leaks because the Trump administration has faced national security leaks at an alarming rate. Lieutenant Colonel Vindman himself said that concerns about leaks seemed justified, and it was not unusual that something would be put in a more restricted circulation. Now, what else is in the record evidence? Mr. Morrison explained his understanding of how the transcript ended up on that server.
I spoke with the NSC Executive Secretariat staff, asked them why, and they did their research and they informed me it had been moved to the higher classification system at the direction of John Eisenberg, whom I then asked why. I mean, if that was the judgment he made, that's not necessarily mine to question, but I didn't understand it. And he essentially told me I gave no such direction. He did his own inquiry, and he represented back to me that his understanding was that it was a kind of administrative error, that when he also gave direction to restrict access, the executive secretary of staff understood that as an apprehension that there was something in the content of the MEMCON that could not exist on the lower classification system.
So to the best of your knowledge, there's no malicious intent in moving the transcript to the compartmented server?
Correct.
Everyone who knew something about it and who testified agreed there was no malicious intent. The call was still available to everyone who needed it as part of their job, and it certainly wasn't covered up or deep-sixed in some way. The president declassified it and made it public. So why we're even here talking about these accusations about a cover-up when it's a transcript that was preserved and made public is somewhat absurd. Now, the other point I'd like to turn to, another accusation from the House managers, is that the whistleblower complaint, when the whistleblower complaint was not forwarded to Congress, they've said that lawyers at the Department of Justice this time, they accuse OLC, the Office of Legal Counsel, of providing a bogus opinion for why the Director of National Intelligence did not have to advance the whistleblower's complaint to Congress. And Manager Jeffries said that OLC opined, quote, without any reasonable basis that the acting DNI did not have to turn over the complaint to Congress, end quote. And the way he portrayed this, now there's a statute that says if the Inspector General of the intelligence community finds a matter of urgent concern, it must be forwarded to Congress. And Manager Jeffries portrayed this as if the only thing to decide was were these claims urgent. He said, quote, what could be more urgent than a sitting president's trying to cheat in an American election by soliciting foreign interference? That's not the only question. The statute doesn't just say if it's urgent, you have to forward it. It talks about urgent concern as a defined term. Now, if the House managers want to come and cast accusations that the political and career officials at the Office of Legal Counsel, which we all know is a very respected office of the Department of Justice, provides opinions for the executive branch on what governing law is, they should come backed up with analysis. So let's look at what the law actually says. And I think we have the slide of that. Urgent concern is defined as a serious or flagrant problem, abuse, violation of law relating to the funding, administration, or operation of an intelligence activity within the responsibility and authority of the Director of National Intelligence involving classified information. So the Office of Legal Counsel was consulted by the General Counsel at the DNI's office, and they looked at this definition and they did an analysis, and they determined that the alleged misconduct is not an urgent concern within the meaning of the statute. Because they're not just talking about, do we think it's urgent? Do we think it's important? No, they're analyzing the law. And they looked at the terms of the statute. The alleged misconduct is not an urgent concern within the meaning of the statute because it does not concern the funding, administration, or operation of an intelligence activity under the authority of the DNI. Remember, what we're talking about here is a head of state communication between the President of the United States and another head of state. This isn't some CIA operation overseas. This isn't the NSA doing something. This isn't any intelligence activity going on within the intelligence community under the supervision of the DNI. It's the head of the executive branch exercising his constitutional authority, engaging in foreign relations with a foreign head of state. So in reaching that conclusion, the Office of Legal Counsel looked at the statute, the case law, the legislative history, and it concluded that this phrase, urgent concern, includes matters relating to intelligence activities subject to the DNI's supervision, but it does not include allegations of wrongdoing arising outside of any intelligence activity or outside the intelligence community itself, and that makes sense. This statute was meant to provide for an ability of the Inspector General of the intelligence community, overseeing the activities of the intelligence community, to receive reports about what was going on at intelligence agencies, those that are members of the intelligence community, if there was fraud, waste, abuse, something unlawful in those activities. It was not meant to create an Inspector General of the presidency, an Inspector General of the Oval Office, to purport to determine whether the president, in exercising his constitutional authorities, had done something that should be reported. This law is narrow, and it does not cover every alleged violation of law, we'll see explained, or other abuse that comes to the attention of a member of the intelligence community. Just because you're in the intelligence community and happen to see something else doesn't make this law apply. And the law does not make the Inspector General for the intelligence community responsible for investigating and reporting on allegations that do not involve intelligence activities or the intelligence community. Now, nonetheless, the president, of course, released the July 25th call transcript. And it was also not the end of the matter that the whistleblower complaint and the ICIG's letter were not sent directly to Congress, because OLC explained that if the complaint does not involve an urgent concern, but if there's anything else there that you want to have checked out, the appropriate action is to refer the matter to the Department of Justice. And that's what the DNI's office did. They sent the ICIG's letter with the complaint to the Department of Justice. And the Department of Justice looked at it. And this was all made public some time ago. The Department of Justice examined the exact allegations of the whistleblower and the exact framing and concern raised by the Inspector General, which had to do with a potential of perhaps a campaign finance law violation. DOJ looked at it, looked at the statutes, analyzed it, and determined there was no violation, and it closed the matter. And it announced that months ago. All right, when something gets sent over to the Department of Justice to examine, you can't call that a cover-up. Everything here was done correctly. The lawyers analyzed the law. The complaint was sent to the appropriate person for review. It was not within the statute that required transmission to Congress. And everything was handled entirely properly. So again, actually extraneous to the matters before you, there's nothing about these 2 points in the articles of impeachment, but it merits a response when reckless allegations are made against those at the White House and at the Department of Justice. And with that, Mr. Chief Justice, I'll yield back my time to Mr. Sekulow.
Thank you, Mr. Chief Justice. Majority Leader McConnell, Democratic Leader Schumer, House Managers, members of the Senate. What we are involved in here, as we conclude, is perhaps the most solemn of duties under our constitutional framework. The trial of the leader of the free world and the duly elected President of the United States. It is not a game of leaks and unsourced manuscripts. That's politics, unfortunately, and Hamilton put impeachment in the hands of this body, the Senate, precisely and specifically to be above that fray. This is the greatest deliberative body on earth. In our presentation so far, you've now heard from legal scholars from a variety of schools of thought, from a variety of political backgrounds. But they do have a common theme with a dire warning. Danger, danger, danger. To lower the bar of impeachment based on these articles of impeachment would impact the functioning of our constitutional republic and the framework of that Constitution for generations. I asked you to put yourself, and I'm quoting Mr. Schiff's, Manager Schiff's statement his father made about putting yourselves in the shoes of someone else, and I said, I'd like you to put yourself in the shoes of the president. And I think it's important as we conclude today that we're reminded of that fact. The President of the United States, before he was the president, was under an investigation. It was called Crossfire Hurricane. It was an investigation led by the FBI, the Federal Bureau of Investigation. James Comey eventually told the president a little bit about the investigation and referenced the Steele dossier. James Comey, the then director of the FBI, said it was salacious and unverified. So salacious and unverified that they used it as a basis to obtain FISA warrants. Members, managers here, managers at this table right here, said that any discussions on the abuse from the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act utilized to get the FISA warrants from the court were conspiracy theories. I told you at the very beginning, I asked, do you put yourselves in the shoes of not just this president, of any president that would have been under this type of attack? FISA warrants issued on people affiliated with his campaign, American citizens affiliated with people of his campaign, citizens of the United States being surveilled pursuant to an order that has now been acknowledged by the very court that issued the order that it was based on a fraudulent presentation.
Oh, come on.
In fact, evidence specifically changed.
Oh, come on. Fraudulent.
Changed by the very FBI lawyer who was in charge of this. Changed to such an extent that the Foreign Surveillance Intelligence Court, as I said earlier, I'm not going to repeat it again, issued 2 orders saying that when this agent, this lawyer, made these misrepresentations to the National Security Division, they also made a misrepresentation to a federal court, the federal court, the Foreign Surveillance Court. A court where there are no defense witnesses. A court where there is no cross-examination. It's a court based on trust. That trust was violated. And then the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, James Comey, decides he will leak a memo of a conversation he had with the President of the United States. And he is leaking the memo for a purpose, he said, to obtain the appointment of a special counsel. And lo and behold, a special counsel was appointed. And it just so happens that that FBI agent, lawyer, who committed the fraud on the FISA court, became a lawyer for the Mueller investigation, only to be removed because of political animus and bias found by the Inspector General. Then we have a special counsel investigation. Lisa Page, Agent Strzok, I'm not going to go into the details. You know them. They're not in controversy, they're uncontroverted. The facts are clear. But does it bother your sense of justice even a little bit? Even a little bit. That Bob Mueller allowed the evidence on the phones of those agents to be wiped clean while there was an investigation going on by the Inspector General. Now, if you did it, Manager Schiff, if you did it, Manager Jeffries, if I did that, destroyed evidence,
We'd go to jail.
if anyone in this chamber did this,
We'd go to jail.
we'd be in serious trouble.
We'd go to jail.
Their serious trouble is they get fired. Bob Mueller's explanation for it is, I don't know what happened. I don't know what happened. I can't recall conversations. You can't view this case in a vacuum. You are being asked, and I say this with the utmost respect, you are being asked to remove an duly elected president of the United States. This isn't we had references to law school exams, and I love the fact that I thought were great analysis yesterday, and I appreciate all of that. But I want to focus today, on my section, on what you're being asked to do. You are being asked to remove a duly elected president of the United States, and you're being asked to do it in an election year. In an election year.
What's that got to do with it?
There are some of you in this chamber right now that would rather be someplace else.
We all would.
And that's why we'll be brief.
We all would.
I understand. You'd rather be someplace else. Why would you rather be someplace else? Because you're running for president, the nomination of your party. I get it. But this is a serious deliberative situation.
We all understand that.
You're being asked to remove a duly elected president of the United States. That's what the articles of impeachment call for, removal.
We understand that too. What's your point?
So we had a special counsel.
What's your point?
And we got the report.
What's your point?
And just for a moment, putting yourselves in the shoes of this president or any president that would be under this situation, you're number 4 at the Department of Justice. His wife is working for the firm that's doing the opposition research on him and is communicating with the foreign former spy, Christopher Steele, to put together the dossier, and it's being handled by Christopher Steele through Nellie Orr to her husband, then the 4th ranking member at the Department of Justice, Bruce Orr, and all of this is going on. And he doesn't want to tell, and he's testified to this, he doesn't want to tell everybody what he's doing because he's afraid he might have to stop. Might have to stop. How did this happen? This is the Federal Bureau of Investigation. And then we ask, why is the president concerned about advice he's being given?
Carelessness is the reason why it happened.
Put yourself in his shoes. We've given you, and our approach has been to give an overview and to be very specific. To remove a duly elected president, which is what you're being asked to do, for essentially policy disagreements. I heard a lot about policy. Although the one that it still troubles me. And this idea that the president, it was said by several of the members, is only doing these things for himself. Understanding what is going on in the world today as we're here. They raised it, by the way. I'm not trying to be disrespectful. They raised it. This president is only doing things for himself while the leaders of opposing parties, by the way, at the highest level, to obtain peace in the Middle East, to say you're only doing that for yourself. I think the irony of that those statements were made while all of that was going on, and other acts that this body's passed, some of them bipartisan, to help the American people. Policy differences. Those policy differences cannot be utilized to destroy the separation of powers. House managers spoke for, I know we've had disagreements on the time, if it was 21 hours or 23 hours. They spoke during their time. A lot of time. Most of it attacking the president, policy decisions. They didn't like what they heard. They didn't like there was a pause on foreign aid. I laid out before that there was pauses on all kinds of foreign aid. It's not the first president to do it. But the one thing I'm still trying to understand from the manager's perspective, and maybe it's not fair to ask the managers because you're not the leader of the House. But remember the whole idea that this was a dire national security threat, a danger to our nation? We had to get this over here right away. It had to be done before Christmas. It was so important. It was so significant. The country was in such jeopardy. The jeopardy was so serious that it had to be done immediately. Let's hold on to the articles of impeachment for a month to see if this House could force the Senate to adopt rules that they wanted, which is not the way the Constitution is set up. But it was such a dire emergency. It was so critical for our nation's national interest that we could hold them for 33 days. Danger, danger, danger. That's politics. As I said, you're being called upon to remove the duly elected president of the United States. That's what these articles of impeachment call for. They never really answer the question of why they thought there was such a national emergency. Maybe they will during questions. I don't know. There was such a national emergency. They never did explain why it was that they waited. They certainly didn't wait to have the proceedings as my colleagues have laid out. I mean, those proceedings moved in record time. I suspect that we've been here more than the House actually considered the actual articles of impeachment. Is that the way the Constitution is supposed to work? Is that the design of the Constitution? And then their question, of course, came up and yesterday on the whole situation with Burisma and the Bidens and that whole issue. And my colleagues went through that a great deal, and I'm not going to do that. But do we have are we in a situation, we used to call this, in free speech cases, like a free speech zone. You could have your free speech activities over here. You can't have them over there. Do we have like a Biden-free zone? I mean, was that what this was? You mention someone, or you're concerned about a company, and it's now off limits. You can impeach your president of the United States for asking a question. I think we significantly showed the question. I'm not going to go through a detail by detail analysis of the facts.
Thank you.
But there are some that we just have to go through. You heard a lot of new facts yesterday in our presentation. Saturday, what we were pointing to is a very quick overview. And then yesterday, we spent the day, and we appreciate everybody's patience on that, going through the facts. They showed you this, but they didn't show you that. The facts are important, though, because facts have legal ramifications. Legal ramifications impact the decisions you make. So I don't take facts lightly, and I certainly don't take the constitutional mandate lightly, and we can't.
It's called consequences.
The facts we demonstrated yesterday and briefly on Saturday demonstrate that there was, in fact, a proper governmental interest in the questions that the president asked and the issues that the president raised on that phone call. A phone call. Now, let's again put your feet in the shoes of the president. Put yourself in the president's position. Do you think he thought when he was on the call it was him and President Zelensky he was talking to and that was it? Or it was, as sometimes I heard one commentator said, it was people listening in on the call, the president and 3,000 of his closest friends. Let's be realistic. The president of the United States knew when he was on that call there were a lot of people listening. From our side and from their side. So he knew what he was saying. He said it. We released a transcript of it. The facts on the call that have been kind of the focus of all of this really focused on foreign policy initiatives both in Ukraine and around the globe. They talked about other countries. Other countries. The president has been very concerned about other countries carrying some of the financial load here, not just the United States. That's a legitimate position for a president to take. If you disagree with it, you have the right to do that. But he is the president. As my colleague, Deputy White House Counsel Philbin just said, that's the executive branch prerogative. That is their constitutional appropriate role. So the call is well documented. There were lots of people on the call. The person that would be on the other end of the quid pro quo, if it existed, would have been President Zelensky. But President Zelensky, and we already laid out the other officials from Ukraine, have repeatedly said there was no pressure. It was a good call. They didn't even know there was a pause in the aid. All of that is well documented. I'm not going to go through each and every one of those facts. We did that over the last several days. President Zelensky's senior advisor, Andrei Yermak, was asked if he ever felt there was a connection between military aid and the request for investigations, and he was adamant that we never had that feeling, and we did not have the feeling that this aid was connected to any one specific issue. This is